didn't see you when I left your Yeah. I don't remember you then. Yes, I was gonna say this is bad.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are on service time. If I can ask those in attendance, please find a seat. And if I can remind everyone to please turn off their cell phone.
So the first act that we're going to do as we begin the service today is Terria, which is customarily back in the day when people heard about a death of a parent or a sibling or a child, they immediately tore their clothes as an external sign of the internal grief that they were feeling. And so today there's become a custom of tearing a ribbon to symbolize that, or tearing one's clothes as well, continuing the tradition of wearing this clothing item throughout the days of Shiva as a symbol of the internal terror that you're feeling. So I'm going to give you this. And I'm going to, you have a ribbon, so if you can rise. If you can just stay, if you can rise. You can, you want to do it later? So we're going to do the blessing. You can repeat after me. Baruch atah Adonai. This blessing is a blessing on truth. And that's truth. And so as we say this blessing today, we think about Izzy. We think about the relationships that each of you had, the sacred, special relationships that each of you had with Izzy, and the truth by which he lived. That's a truth that he manifested in this world that does not disappear. The echoes of that truth will continue to live on for generations to come. And that's something that you hold on to today. So as we say this bracha, this blessing where we bless the God of truth, we hold those moments of truth that Izzy manifested and is modeled for all of us. And I just invite you during this service, even for those who are not speaking, or maybe especially for those who are not speaking, to connect with what those experiences of truth were for you and what you're going to hold on to and enable to become a true blessing. And we're here in Denver and we can look up to the mountains as the psalmist sings. Where do I find my help? Where do I find my release? I look up to the mountains and I am enamored in these times of challenge by the wonders of creation. In the words of Ecclesiastes, a season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for dancing, a time for wailing, a time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for living. Honest, trustworthy, ambitious, loyal, a man who put his family first, loving, patient, entrepreneurial, frugal but generous, sometimes confrontational but always compassionate, a man with a huge moral compass. Isadore Kozatch lived 99 remarkable years. So we are here today and in person with many people here today, in person and on our live stream, with many people, friends, and family members who loved Izzy. These include, but are not limited to, his children, Marcy, Jerry, and Val, and Rivka, his sister-in-laws, Shirley and Joan, his grandchildren, Shai, Tamara, Shahar, and Leah and Mara, and 9 great-grandchildren. A handful of years ago, Izzy sat at a funeral and he told his granddaughter Mara, "Don't let them tell lies about me at my funeral. Just tell the truth." He was humble, and being the center of attention was not something that Izzy craved, maybe with the exception of the moments when he wanted to tell a really good joke. So I want to say this, Izzy, telling the truth is exactly what we are aiming to do today. And there are a lot of beautiful truths for us to tell. We don't need to make up stories about you because your life was filled with much wisdom and beauty. We hope to capture that here today. A few years ago, Jerry had a surprise 95th birthday party for Izzy, and he invited everyone who he thought might attend his eventual funeral to create for Isadore in his lifetime an ability to see all of his people. While Izzy wouldn't have planned such a party for himself, he knew that it was very, very special. Likewise, a handful of years ago, Isadore was invited on an honor flight for World War II veterans. He was astonished as he walked through the airport, and people were lined up giving honor to this group of old men, as he put it, to this group of veterans. It really made an incredible impression on him. People were opening up doors, and they were really making these veterans feel special. So today, we are doing something similar to that. We are telling truths as Izzy wanted. We are standing and honoring and metaphorically opening doors for a man who lived generously and lovingly and always opened doors for others. Today, we are celebrating a man who is leaving a legacy, a life that will have a ripple effect for years and years to come. So I want to invite, as our first speaker, to share words of memory and words of love, Izzy's son, Jerry.
Morning. I've written and revised this eulogy in my mind so many times over the last several years. Somehow I couldn't bring myself to actually transfer all these thoughts to paper until last night. Over the last few days, I've been astonished in a positive way to find out how many people that called me were impacted by my father, shared stories that I had no previous knowledge of. The common theme was shared memories from childhood and adulthood, but there was still this wonderment of not really knowing the very personal relationships he had with close family members and friends. Who knew? The overwhelming similarities in all these stories from my cousins, friends, was how my father was really a good uncle to each of them. He talked to them with compassion and respect, was relatively judgment-free, steered the conversation, and offered advice in a productive direction. He was always very direct, but not in an authoritarian manner. He truly expressed interest in what I would describe as important things, never talking down to people, and always treating his nephews and nieces as adults, even when they were children. He delighted in including young people and new family members into his inner sanctum of stories, personal insights, sarcastic remarks, and jokes. He loved to tell jokes. He was so good at bantering with wise guys that they often laughed at being the butt of their own joke. For my father, one of the best parts of meeting new people was gaining an ever-expanding audience for his stories, always interwoven somehow with their unknown clues. His storytelling skills were recognized and remembered by all the people who became captivated by them. He had a masterful memory for facts, names, and events that continued until his final days. I don't believe that quality time is always better than quantity time. Quality time is memorable, but I think that quantity time is what becomes your brain's muscle memory. I don't know if the length and depth of my time with Mr. K, as he was often called, molded or shaped him in any way. However, he had a profound effect on my life. I always tried to emulate his good qualities and reject those I considered detrimental. He taught me through his often repeated isms, rhetorical statements, or cryptic messages that seemed unchallengeable. Many times, a situation would develop, and that would prompt a story meant to re-emphasize or clarify his point. It was surprising how many times it happened, but it was not surprising how often the same story came up. Those of us who have heard these stories over and over again have integrated them into the fabric of our lives. I love and will continue to love it when someone comes up to me and says, you know what your father would say to that, or I'll tell you about a story about your father and me. In retrospect, one of the defining characteristics about my father was how everyone involved with him has the same general feeling about his attributes and shortcomings. Very few have not experienced his stinging retorts, unwavering opinions, and his stern determination, commitment to do the right thing. Not surprisingly, those are the things that drew many people toward him. Once inside Izzy's unplanned web, those individuals were rewarded with consideration, protection, compassion, and a commitment to their own personal situations. When I was a little boy, I had a unique relationship with food. I mostly avoided anything that was vegetable-like or was mixed in a manner where things I didn't like could not be easily identified. He would always order for me at a restaurant to make sure the server knew not to put anything on my hamburger. He also would ask them, with his no-nonsense but endearing way, to bring my apple pie with whipped cream. Copious amounts. He always remembered the details of all of his friends' special needs. He knew who was a vegetarian, who was allergic to gluten, who was a diabetic, who needed extra, who needed less. This is starting to sound like the description of certain dog breeds who live to protect, loyal, aloof to strangers, defending his flock, and a beloved family member. You could say these same attributes apply to so many people, and you'd be right. But his expression of his unique personality separated him from other do-gooders and stubborn curmudgeons. When I needed to help him in his final years, he reluctantly let me take over. one by one, all of the things that he could no longer do. It has been a difficult adjustment for both of us, him not wanting to need help and me wanting to help him in a way that was non-judgmental and acknowledging all of his special needs without making him feel self-conscious. This loss of ability for him was his most painful feeling towards the end. His inability to supervise or navigate the simplest of life's challenges at that point was a devastating blow. In the end, he became very dependent on me, but lost most of that feeling of helplessness, knowing that I was ready and able to go to the mat to protect and defend him. My goal for his end of life was to enable him to have the best quality of life that was possible for as long as he had time left with us. I did everything I could, acknowledging my own limitations, to make this happen. I tried to bring humor and levity to his life, hoping to distract him from the grim reality of his life peppered with loss of loved ones, loss of self-sufficiency, and ultimately loss of life itself. I know he appreciated all that I did for him and how nearly impossible it was for him to tell me. Today is a sad day, but not a tragic day. One of the perks of a long life is that your loved ones have so much time to adjust to the ultimate reality of the cessation of life. Just as there is joy at life's beginning, there is also satisfaction and admiration of a life filled with many wonderful experiences. He did not die before his time. He died at exactly the right time. Now free from pain and suffering, he was able to reach the end of earthly life with no regrets and great thankfulness for the hand he was dealt. I'd like to thank you all for coming today to show your love for Izzy and celebrate his life. And I hope to hear some of your stories in the near future. Thank you.
Before the David, never will answer. Amen. She showed that, and any of my lips at that. And that is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures. God leads me beside the still waters. God restores my soul. God guides me on a straight path for God's name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Adonai forever. So it's customary to say this song at a funeral, and I think one of the primary reasons connects with how you ended, Jerry. You said this is a sad day. It's not a tragic day because he lived to be 99 years old, but it's a sad day. And what this piece reminds us of is that even in our most vulnerable states, even in the moments where we feel our deepest sadness, we know that there will be green pastures that lie ahead. And that our job as humans who continue to walk on this earth is to carry the memories of our loved ones and to sit in the pain, but also to know that there will be joy that comes in the days that follow. And that we have this amazing opportunity to make the stories and the jokes that Izzy told, to make them a blessing. If you look in the dictionary under mensch, Izzy's family asserts that a picture of Isadore Kozatch should pop up. Izzy was born in Belgium and moved to America when he was 2. His family moved to Massachusetts and New Jersey. He learned at a young age the value of honesty. When the family moved, because his dad couldn't pay rent, his dad went back sometime later to make good on the money that he owed. It was that value, doing what you say you're going to do, doing what is right, that Isadore lived by. Izzy looked out at the world and saw human struggle. And he knew that we human beings feel pain and challenge no matter where we live and no matter what our background is. In business, he applied this philosophy, trying to help the people who struggled, like the woman he affectionately referred to as the chicken lady. She worked at a chicken restaurant for 5 points. And she would come into the store and regularly deposit $10 with a plan to save up enough money to buy a few items for her house. She and others benefited greatly from Izzy's generosity and kindness. When it came to running a business, Izzy's philosophy was that he needed to focus on building relationships. It was always about the relationships. And that then he would have lifelong customers. He was right. Izzy had generational customers that passed the tradition of shopping at his store down to their children and grandchildren, people who were loyal to him, people who trusted him. Izzy enjoyed reading and he enjoyed listening to music. He especially loved going to concerts and arriving early so that he could get a good seat for free at Aspen. He was a true lifelong learner, enrolling in college classes in his 70s and 80s, appreciating that $5 fee due to audit a class, and jumping into anything that was in the humanities and literature and music. Stuff that he really wanted to learn and hadn't gotten the chance to learn when he was younger, and so appreciated the opportunity to enjoy. Izzy met Ida at a USO picnic when he was in his 20s. He didn't want to go, but a friend made him go, and there she was. And they did get married months later, but during the time when they were courting, he actually was stationed away from Denver, and Jerry shared that he found letters that his dad had written every single day, writing a new letter to his love while he was gone. They had a happy marriage. It was rather traditional. He was in charge, except for in the areas where she was in charge. He was interested in decorating the house. He was interested in renovating the kitchen, and he methodically did what he did, and it didn't bother her. She let him handle it because she knew that he would do it well. She always had dinner ready at 6:30, and everybody knew that this was dedicated family time, not time to answer the phone, time to be present with one another. As Ida aged, Izzy really stepped up and he took care of her. He was very attentive and protective of her and of her health care. She was sick for about 10 years, and being a caregiver truly wasn't a natural fit for Izzy. But he did it, and he did it well. And this was because of his loyalty and his love and his commitment. He was steadfast in this role. Izzy was a beloved grandfather. His grandchildren noted how he really modeled an ability to evolve over time. Izzy adapted and became more and more open-minded throughout his life. While he knew the value of college degrees and he did put money away for his grandchildren's higher education, he also accepted and supported Mara when she made the decision to go her own route, focusing on working and doing what she loved and doing what she was good at. He knew that people couldn't be put in a box, and he honored his people by seeing for them for who they really were. So part of honoring them was understanding them. And Izzy wanted to understand his grandchildren and what they did and what was going on in their heads, because he loved them and he wanted to connect. So he was always interested in his grandchildren's activism, their political engagement, as well as their intellectual pursuits. So when Leah was studying theater, Izzy went into a room and pulled out a big book of Eugene O'Neill, wanting to talk with her about the storylines and the characters and the philosophies and the messages. Then there were the newspaper clippings. One of Izzy's ways of connecting with ideas with his family members' interests was to send you newspaper clippings. He sent them to everybody. If you had a passion, you likely received a clipping about such passion. And this was one of Izzy's ways of connecting, with engaging, with showing you that he cared. Family was so important to Izzy, and he took great pride in the fact that his family was functional, that people got along and people liked being with each other. He even felt a sense of pride, like maybe he deserved some of the credit for that. He was welcoming to everybody who joined the family, accepting of people who, as they were and for who they were. He accepted who his grandchildren loved, who his children loved. Everyone belongs. That was his philosophy. And as newcomers to the family, you all became loved as well. Isadore lived by strong moral convictions. Jerry remembers a time when he was walking with his dad and a blind man was waiting to cross the street. Izzy went and asked if this man needed some help. Jerry, you said that you were really struck in that moment because your dad had this sort of courage to do something that people don't often do. Walk up to strangers and ask them if they needed help. And there your dad was doing exactly that. And when you asked your dad about it, like, why did you do this? Why did you approach a stranger? Your dad just said, well, it seemed like the right thing to do. Izzy really enjoyed a good story. And he had a tremendous ability to tell a joke. A really good joke, really, really well. In fact, he had a piece of paper that he stashed away in his wallet, and on that piece of paper was a list of punchlines so that he could always be prepared to make people who surrounded him laugh. Izzy also had a particular talent for giving it back to people who deserved it. So what I mean by this is that if somebody said something to get a rise from him, he loved it if he could just sort of get under and flip it back at them and get a rise out of them as well. While these past 10 years were more challenging with Izzy's Parkinson's disease, Izzy lived until he was 99, and he generally lived really, really well. So what was his secret? He exercised regularly. He kept himself intellectually engaged and was always listening. And even when he could no longer hear well, he was really, really listening to people and what they said, whether that was at dinner, where he was living, or whether that was with all of you. He would focus in and try to listen even when it was a challenge. He had a regular schedule that he kept to, and I'm told he ate very healthful food and always got a good night's sleep. And I'm also told that he loved ice cream, and that he had a ritual of eating ice cream every single day. And I have to say that I'm hoping that that might be a secret to long life as well. Izzy loved, and he knew that he was loved. I'm certain that this fact brought him tremendous joy up until the very end. He had family who cared about him and cared for him. He had family that visited and that called and that made it a point to live nearby. Each of you elevated Izzy's life. Isadore Kozatch, a true mensch, Zichrono Livracha. His memory is truly a blessing. I want to introduce Rabbi Foster, who will share a eulogy as well in honor and in memory of Izzy.
In the name of our God and God of all generations. Thou who governest all things with infinite wisdom and mercy, and guidest the destinies of all humankind. As a parent, have you loved us and showered your blessings upon us. Therefore, we shall not murmur even when sorrow befalls us, but with humility and unfaltering trust, we shall accept your decrees. In joy and in sorrow alike, we praise your goodness. We acknowledge your justice. We remember that we are but strangers upon earth. Like a shadow, our life flees away. Help us, O God, so to walk in your sight, that when the few years of our earthly pilgrimage are ended, we may be ready to meet our end with tranquil mind. Thee we look for comfort and strength when one of our beloved is taken from us, and the link is broken in the chain of love which binds us together. Though we walk in the valley of the shadow of death, we shall fear no evil, for you are with us. Praise the eternal our God in all our dispensations, and sanctified be your name, now and forevermore. Let's all sing together. Beloved family, dear friends, permit me just a few moments to add to the very, very beautiful words that have already been shared with us. Words born out of love for a human being whose life in this world was long. It's always difficult when we lose our loved ones, even when they live just to the brink of 100 years. We think about all of the things he saw in his life. Think of the joys, we think of the sorrows, we think of the fact that throughout his life he saw the worst that humankind can do to one another, yet he also saw the best. I think in some ways he wanted always to emulate the best, because that's the kind of human being he was. This is truly a bittersweet moment. I think myself, and I want to be very honest because that's what he would expect of us. When Jerry called me the other day and told me that his dad was in the process of his last few days, he said that his dad asked me to be at his funeral, and I'm saying to myself, yeah, but I'm not sure why. I mean, I've known Izzy for almost 51 years. And as I'm here today, I think about the fact that the first piece of furniture I bought was from Izzy. The last piece of furniture I bought was from Chuck Eisen, who's here too. I don't know what that says, but it's an honest reflection. So I started to think about why should I be here? And I really, in the honest way in which he would want us to say this, I'm here, I know why. Because everybody else that he knew 50 years ago is gone. I'm the only rabbi left that really knew him. And I was proud to know him. He was a neighbor of the temples. And in private moments, he would say to me, Rabbi, he says, I always lived across from the temple. I wish that he could go there. That's what he wanted. Although he loved BJ and he loved Rodev, he loved the temple. And it was his neighbor over these years. These moments of separation, no matter when they come, no matter that he was almost 100 years old, they're difficult moments. Grief can come to us as a teacher. It can come to you as family as a teacher. As many of you know, one of the things that I do in my life at this point is I'm a hospice chaplain. And I spend a lot of time with people who are at the end of life. And one of the things that I've learned from them is the following. People who are in the process of dying think about three things. Number one, they want others to understand what they lived for, what the purpose of their life was. Secondly, they want to know that they made a difference. That it wasn't just years spent, it wasn't just a job. That whatever it was that a person does, they want to know that it had purpose. And lastly, people who are in that process of time want to know that they'll be remembered. So I want to say something about all three of those. Number one, we do understand what he lived for. Yesterday, in talking with the family was very clear that they understood who he was. Even during those moments when he would not be taken advantage of by anyone, they understood his ideal, trying to be honest, trying to build those relationships that he had, that Rabbi Copeland spoke about so beautifully. He wanted to build those relationships based upon honesty. He wanted people to walk out of that store, Franklin Furniture, not and say, I'll never come back here again, but to say, if I need something, I will come back here again. And that's what he wanted, and that's what he wanted other people to understand about him. Secondly, he wanted to know that he made a difference. Listening to the family yesterday, he did make a difference. He made a difference in everyone's life. I think, for example, the fact that, yes, he was an immigrant to this country. I'm not sure that he knew at the time that he was going to be an immigrant to the United States of America. But he was an immigrant. And he and his parents, mostly his parents, came to this place not because there were opportunities, although that was a real reason to come here. And even though he was born in Belgium, remember his family came from Eastern Europe. Why did they leave Eastern Europe? They left Eastern Europe because anti-Semitism was so real. So many of us, myself included, are part of generations whose grandparents or parents came to this country. And the people who were born here, or I would say someone like Izzy, who was brought here as an infant, as a child, they had a role to play. That role was to secure the freedom that their parents came here to find. And they did. Not just the financial security, that was part of it. They wanted the next generation to understand what being in this great country is all about. And what did they want to pass on to the next generation? They wanted to pass on to the next generation that they had a responsibility for continuity. We are a great Jewish people. No matter how it is that we practice our Jewish life, people like Izzy wanted to make sure that that continuity was recognized. That the next generations, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, would all understand the life Izzy and his parents was about and why they came here. They'll be remembered for all of that, all of them, because you all love them, you care about them. So what was that wonderful, wonderful legacy? That immigrant's legacy. It was service to the Jewish people in so many ways. Izzy was a person who was really easy to like. It wasn't difficult. He didn't go out of his way to make enemies. He went out of his way, again, to create those relationships. He was honest and forthright when he needed to be. And he wanted people to understand there was no pushover. He was a person who had principles, and he wanted those principles to be remembered. Everybody's referred to his sense of humor. I just want to add one thing to it. His sense of humor was something that he did with a straight face. I remember many times that he told me a story and knew that I would laugh, but never laughed before I did. Always with that straight face. That was his sense of humor. He was also very strong in your home, Jerry. Your sister was not here, who she was. As you told me yesterday, because I asked you, I said, now who was the disciplinarian in your home? And you said it was very clear, Dad was the disciplinarian. And why? Because he said that this is a democracy in the United States, but not in my house. It's not a democracy, it is a benevolent dictatorship. And what he meant by that was, he'll make the decisions. Especially if he wanted you guys to do something that you didn't necessarily want to happen. So when he came back to this great city after World War II, and found his beloved Ida, who he shared those 63 years. They were partners in life. And I honestly do believe it. I knew her so well as well. She was in charge. She was in charge of your dad. Now, whether he wanted you to think he was in charge of everybody else, that's another story. But she was really in charge. We who knew them, loved them both. Both had respect for this community. We both had respect for rabbis, no matter who they are. As I have said on many, many occasions over the years. Look, I came here, I was 27 years old. Been here 51 years old. That's almost 78 for those of you who are still having a hard time adding, subtracting. I was just a kid. And when I went into that Franklin furniture store, saw Charlotte and Lenny Ruback, and was introduced to Izzy. Call me by my first name. He's never once in all these years ever referred to me as Steve. It was always Rabbi. And I think that was the respect that he had for our tradition. For the people who, in one way or another, try to carry forward their tradition. Because he was a caring person. He loved the people for them walking the walk, not just talking the talk. Because he was a person of great integrity, a person who understood that we are judged in life by what we do, not necessarily by what we say. Making sure that we do the things that need to be done. So his Kozatch had a real impact upon our community. Strong, forthright, with all of those things, these two beautiful images that have already been shared, all of those things that he thought. Poet wrote, "When you remember me, it means that you have carried something of who I am, that I have left some mark of who I am upon who you are. It means you can summon me back to your mind even when I'm gone. You can still see my face and hear my voice and speak to me in your heart. For as long as you remember me, I am not entirely gone." I do believe that that's what each and one of us. To remember him, to remember all those good moments, to remember the strengths that were his, so that we can pass that on to the next generation, so that they will live by those strengths, and that their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will live by those strengths. Lastly, the words of another poet. The poet wrote, "When I die, if you need to weep, cry for someone walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around others and give them what you need to give me. You can love me most by sharing your joys and multiplying your good deeds. You can love me most by letting me live in your eyes and not in your mind. When you say Kaddish, remember what our tradition teaches. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away." That would be the greatest gift he asks of us. Remember him, to give that away to others who so need it. God has given. God has taken away. Praise be the name of God now and forevermore. Let's all sing together. Now, dear family and friends, may I ask you all please to rise. El Malerachamim Shachin Bamum. Considering from the Tachat Confession. Im Kedoshim Dorim Kazor Harakim Lazim. Et Nishma Yitzchak. And Yeshayahu Levi Miriam. Shalachim Balarachamim. Vestirehum Besitik Knafavim. ויצחור בצרור החיים את נשמתו אדוני ונתנתו. רוח בשלום על משכבו. God, full of compassion, eternal spirit of the universe, and perfect rest in your sheltering presence. To Isadore Kozatch, who has entered into eternity. God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence. Let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Of his possession, its repose, and peace. Dear friends, see them. And we want you to know that they will observe Freedom Shiva tonight and tomorrow night. We'll be on Zoom. You can get the address or the link. From Jim Coleman and Feldman's. It will be at 7 o'clock tonight and 7 o'clock tomorrow night. And I know that they would love to have you there so that you can share your own stories at some point. This does conclude our service here at Congregation of Shalom. The term will follow immediately at Temple Emmanuel Cemetery. No, what I said Temple Emmanuel Cemetery. Just at Fairmont, not in Temple. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Cousin Jay Marks.
So ladies and gentlemen, in just a few minutes, we'll be escorting the casket and the family back to their cars. Since burial is at Fairmount proper, we are under a time restriction of 12 noon, pull into their gates. So please, if you wish to come to the cemetery, return your cars as quickly as you can. Enter off of Alameda. You're welcome to follow us. However, you must obey all traffic laws since we do not have an escort procession. In addition, if I can ask you to refrain from bothering or catching the family at this time because it may delay us getting to the cemetery timeline. Forward. Please, I don't.
They send so much. I still have a lot of order from the garden.
It's always good to be seen, Jay.